Yo, it's me, Captain Gold, and you're watching yet another gold standard beginner's guide for Project Zomboid. In this video, I'll be your designated tour guide for Knox County. I'll be breaking down each major town in Vanilla Zomboid, that way you'll know everything you need to know about the map. I'll be starting off with the spawn towns first before I move on to the smaller towns and regions. And then eventually I'll be covering the big bad itself, Louisville. Also, if you haven't yet, feel free to check out my channel for other helpful beginner guides. That being said, it's time for you to sit back and relax as our tour of Knox County is about to begin. Riverside is arguably the most beginner-friendly town as it has plenty of good loot locations, base locations, and a decently low Z population that is spread out throughout this vast town. Oh, and who can forget the giant fucking river next to it? Riverside has a police station which will be stocked with a small number of guns and some ammunition. It has a gas station on the upper end of the city limits as well. There's a bookstore for skill books and magazines along with the post office and school, both of which hold large quantities of books. There's a supermarket for food and various grocery stores and restaurants. There's even a hardware store if you need tools. And there's also the incredibly valuable VHS store where you can find entertainment and skill tapes. Don't forget the fishing store where you can find 2 large rain collector barrels. And there's also a bar in town. The gated communities on the other side of town are filled with great loot, and they also make for great base locations. The homes with many garages may contain generators as well. On the outskirts of town, there is an area where tons of cars can be located. There's also a nice farm on the outskirts. You can even find an auto shop, a pair of warehouses, and a storage facility where you can find great loot, car parts, and plenty of generators. Then there's also the trailer park, but that community is rather forgettable. Near Riverside is the ghost town where you could find free metal traps and an antique oven. There's also a nice little gas station near it. Then there's the Bountiful Country Club, filled with a whole assortment of delicious jams and goodies. This building here actually makes for a decent base location, just like the You Store It and the warehouses. There's also plenty of areas surrounding Riverside that make for great loot runs. Welcome to Rosewood. This quaint town is my personal recommendation for beginners, and it also so happens to be the very first town I ever played in. Now, I am aware that it lacks some of the great qualities of Riverside, but it does have its own unique locations that make this town worth visiting and even living in. On top of all of that, this town has a very low Z population, albeit the population is denser. The town's layout is also super easy to memorize. The police station, which is larger than Riverside's, often contains more guns and ammunition. Then there's the legendary fire station where you can find plenty of good loot, including numerous fire axes and firefighter gear. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that this station makes for an excellent base. Oh, and this is also the only fire station that you can find outside of Louisville. Rosewood has a bookstore and a school for all your skill book and magazine needs. There's also an actual clinic for your medical needs. There's plenty of grocery stores, restaurants, and a supermarket for your food needs as well. There's even a bar and a gated community. There are tons of quality homes with good loot, so many garages with so many opportunities to get a generator. There's an auto shop and 2 gas stations, one of which is near a water source and a drive-in theater where there's plenty of cars to be found. This town also has an insanely beginner-friendly base location, known as the construction site. 4 pre-existing fences, free logs, 3 trailers, and plenty of easily defensible space. Then there's the prison, the ultimate challenge for those seeking a thrilling Z-killing experience. But beware, this structure is not for the faint of heart, but it does contain a bountiful armory with guns and ammunition. Now, Rosewood does lack a proper hardware store, and most crucially, a VHS store. So you're gonna have to travel to find skill tapes and maybe to find some farming equipment. However, Rosewood is near March Ridge, Muldraugh, Doe Valley, and Fallas Lake. Both March Ridge and Muldraugh have VHS stores. Oh, and who can forget that the secret military base isn't really far from this wonderful Kentucky town. You just can't go wrong with Rosewood. Muldraugh is perhaps the most popular town in vanilla Project Zomboid. Unlike Riverside and Rosewood, this medium-sized municipality is actually based on a real town by the same name. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that to be so fascinating. Like, you could literally visit Muldraugh, Kentucky. Be that as it may, Muldraugh has a higher Z population than both Riverside and Rosewood, and it is typically considered to be the town that intermediate players should spawn in. As a matter of fact, my last private playthrough was actually in this wonderful town. Regardless of its Z population, Muldraugh has so much to offer in terms of its base locations and its quality loot. For starters, there's 2 gas stations in town, just like Riverside and Rosewood. There's a VHS store, a police station, a bookstore, numerous restaurants and grocery stores, multiple storage facilities filled with tons of good loot, plenty of stocked warehouses, 2 bars and a liquor store, an electronics store, a school, a clinic, an auto shop, a lumber mill, a logging company warehouse, multiple water sources, and numerous quality homes filled with good shit. Now, not too far from Muldraugh is a radio relay station, which makes for an interesting secluded base location. Then there's also this vast warehouse district, which comes with an auto shop and restaurant. Then there's the rail yard and farm. These specific locations on screen make for excellent bases, and they're all situated in this sprawling Kentucky town. Everything you could ever need can be found in this town, so long as you don't mind the higher Z population, which, by the way, is mostly concentrated on the main road. Muldraugh is also close to West Point, March Ridge, Dixie, Doe Valley, and Rosewood, meaning that this centrally located town is an excellent location for a forward operating base. All in all, Muldraugh is probably the best town in this game. Do you like being surrounded by hordes of the undead? Do you like not having many solid options for good bases? Do you like okay loot, but you have to deal with the insane risk of multiple hordes? Then you'll love West Point. There's a gun store here, which will require a sledgehammer or a gimmicky fire hacks trick in order to reach said guns. There's also a sizable police station with a decently sized armory. The downtown area is filled with plenty of useful shops, like a clinic, bookstore, auto shop, gas station, supermarket, multiple restaurants, some bars, and a pharmacy. The town also has a warehouse, a storage facility, a sizable school, a massive auto store, another gas station, and access to a river. If you look at the outskirts of this town, you'll discover what is arguably one of the best base locations in-game. Up the shore of the Ohio River is a collection of high-end homes next to a pristine lake. This location is far from the hordes, surrounded by a thick forest, and is next to 2 amazing water sources. One of these homes comes with a pre-existing tall metal rail fence, and also a garage with a second story. That being said, West Point is often considered to be less of a starting town and more of a launch point into Louisville. Now, if that's how you want to use West Point, I'd recommend securing the American Tire store and turning it into a forward operating base. From there, you could just go down the road and you'll be in Louisville in no time. All things considered, West Point isn't really a good town. Without the use of mods, you can't really spawn in the town of March Ridge. That said, this town does have some quirks that make it somewhat worth visiting. For starters, there's a VHS store, and also a community center with a sizable library. This town also contains a supermarket, a pharmacy, a clinic, a gas station, and a military apartment complex that is often stocked with decent loot and weaponry. If you're starting in Rosewood, this will be the closest town with a VHS store. This town happens to be littered with nothing but residential buildings, so there's gonna be a ton of biters here, believe me. But there's also plenty of decent furniture and cars to find. All in all, March Ridge isn't a necessary stop, but if you do visit, you might find some nice shit. Just be very careful when you come here. If you're starting out at Riverside, Fallas Lake will be the very first town you visit for loot, as it's the closest town to Riverside. While loot isn't bountiful here, you'll come to find that this tiny town does have a little bit of everything. There's a bar, a decently sized bookstore, a small police station with a small armory, a farming goods store with plenty of guns and ammunition, a hardware store, plenty of areas to find food, and an excellent 2-story gas station that makes for an excellent safe house or forward operating base. Said gas station is even next to a water source. The only thing that Fallas Lake needs is a video store. Be that as it may, the homes themselves in this town are pretty decent. So when you consider everything, this town is definitely worth a visit. Hell, you might as well just live here. Just be careful when you get here though, as the Zed population is a bit higher than you would expect. And all of those undead hordes are all concentrated around the areas you're going to want to loot. Welcome to the least exciting and least profitable location on the map, Dixie. I mean, there's a nice clothing store here with a used car dealership, both of which are sitting next to a Spiffos restaurant and gas station. Speaking of that gas station, if you're playing in Muldraugh, this gas station actually makes for a decent safe house on your way to West Point. The rest of Dixie is littered with low-quality trash trailer homes. The rundown restaurant does have arcade machines if you're looking to collect or dismantle them. There's also another gas station here which seems to contain a small living area. And if you like orange soda, this trailer is filled with it. There's also a food market and a laundromat here. Off in the woods near Muldraugh is this drug dealer's house. And further off in the woods is Ben's cabin. Generally speaking, Dixie is a forgettable town. I mean, yeah, you could find some useful stuff here, but its only real value is the gas station next to the clothing store. Oh, and for some reason, the main road here is always cluttered with destroyed vehicles. And the Zed population is abnormally high for this location's square mileage. Are you a fan of The Walking Dead? If so, you might like Doe Valley, as it resembles the earlier seasons of the show, post-Atlanta. It's nothing but an open countryside region. That being said, there are some notable structures in this jurisdiction, like the awesome Army Surplus Store, which contains a treasure trove of guns and ammunition, along with a cornucopia of military equipment. There's also a gas station here and an auto shop. And yes, there's also restaurants for you to loot for food and ingredients. Then there's Herschel's Farm, a relatively safe location where you could find decent loot and a shed containing an antique oven. But the single best aspect of this farm is the well located next to the house. That is an infinite source of fresh or potable water. There's another well to be found not too far from this location, and this area is also just as good as the farm. There's plenty of agricultural warehouses littered throughout this region, all of which are useless once the non-refrigerated food spoils. If anything, I often find myself using these buildings as safe houses. Generally speaking, Doe Valley is the safest place to live in-game, but good loot is scarce, and you're gonna have to travel far and often for scavenging runs. On your way to Louisville, you'll be driving by Valley Station. This region has one notable landmark, being the large mall. If you can somehow clear this massive facility, and good luck to you, you'll have access to a goldmine of valuable loot, all in one easily accessible location. But this is no easy task, even for veterans of the game. That being said, this area has plenty of cars and food establishments. Then there's also the drag strip for those of you who like driving fast and competing in quarter-mile races. The small town next to this drag strip has some decent homes and food establishments. Then there's this good base location right here. It's totally fenced in, next to the woods and next to a river. Another great landmark in this region is the shooting range, which isn't far from the hunting lodge. Both of these locations will grant you access to guns. There's also a storage facility and 2 gas stations in this spread out region. All things considered, Valley Station makes for an excellent forward operating base that enables you to enter Louisville with ease. There are areas on the map that don't have official names or region titles, so I figured I'd point them out for you. As I mentioned earlier, there is a secret military base near Rosewood. It's incredibly difficult to get here, and the woods here are also infested with the undead. There actually isn't any good loot in here either. Surprised, right? At least, not any loot I'd consider worth getting when you consider the risks associated with getting here. To the north of Doe Valley is this random assortment of buildings. There's a gas station here, some homes, a grocery store, a camping store, and a small gun store. Then there's the campgrounds next to this large lake, which is also near Doe Valley. Last but not least is the small cabin with a well in between Doe Valley and Muldraugh, which is literally in the middle of the woods. These locations are unique and interesting, but they all have one thing in common. They're far as fuck from decent loot. We finally made it to the single largest city in vanilla Project Zomboid, the grand city of Louisville, Kentucky. In order to get an adequate understanding of this city's scale, here's an example of Muldraugh easily fitting inside this metropolis. That's right, several Muldraghs could fit inside this vast urban jungle. That being said, it would be an understatement to say that Louisville contains a fuckload of loot and base locations. It would also be fairly obvious to point out that this city has the highest population of biters in-game. Since this city is massive, I'm only going to highlight the very best points of interest. The first location I want to show you is the military camp or checkpoint at the entrance of the city. At this location, you'll come to find plenty of guns, ammunition, military gear, and furniture. You'll also find plenty of medical supplies and potentially some generators. In order to get in, you'll need to break down the gate. Across the street from this encampment is a train yard that could make for an excellent multiplayer base. It's right next to the city, which makes loot runs easier to conduct, but it is also next to some fresh water sources and plenty of woods. There's plenty of garage space and room for living as well, including a second story which could make this a safe location to live in if you happen to have a sledgehammer to knock down these stairs. There's even room for a minimal rooftop farm. All you gotta do is block these openings. Now, not too far from this location is a hole in the perimeter fence surrounding Louisville. Just walk into the woods from this train station and you'll find this alternate entrance, which takes you directly into the refugee camp. This camp will certainly have a generator or two laying around. The next area that is worth visiting is an interesting industrial park right across the street from the St. Peregrine Hospital. There's the Value Tech building, which has plenty of radios and electronics. Then there's also the Knox Pack Kitchens warehouse, where you'll find a plethora of kitchen furniture and warehouse supplies. There's also a normal warehouse, some random offices, and even a steel working warehouse where you can find metal crates. Further up north in the same industrial park is a dog food warehouse and a massive auto shop where you can find plenty of car parts. Just like the military checkpoint, this location isn't too deep inside the city, so it makes for an excellent spot for looting. On the other side of Louisville, also on the outskirts by the way, is Aaron's Hunting Supplies store. If you can break down the wall with a sledgehammer, you'll have access to plenty of guns and ammunition. Not too far from this location is the best base location in Louisville. Easy to defend, 3 houses, a water source, plenty of woods, this small subdivision is prime real estate. In Louisville, there's a small mall and even a massive mall. If you don't mind clearing these areas of the undead, they can be scavenged for a metric ton of valuable loot. There's even a gun store inside the larger mall. There's also multiple VHS stores in Louisville, including the single largest VHS store in game. In the thick of it is the Army Surplus store, which holds a treasure trove of military weapons and gear. There's also the Scarlet Oak Distillery, which is where you can find an assload of alcohol. It also makes for a decent base, believe it or not. Now, if you like bats, take some time to loot the Louisville Bruiser Warehouse, where you can find crates filled with premium bats. And if you want to decorate your base with great artwork, just go and loot the art gallery in Louisville. Louisville also has 3 fire stations, 2 police stations, tons of restaurants and bars, tons of gas stations, bookstores, and a metric fuck ton of high-end houses and mansions. The city of Louisville is truly the best location in game if you can handle the hordes of the undead. Anyways, that concludes this gold standard beginner's guide. If you enjoy this sort of content, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subs before the end of January, so let's make it happen. Also, please leave a comment on the video. I want to hear your feedback and your tips and tricks for beginners. Oh, and don't forget, please check out my channel for more Zomboid content. With all of that said, I'm Captain Gold, and I hope to see you in my next video.